I think sometimes we get too wrapped up in the screen conversation. We really don't know how someone's saying something, and maybe we think it's more snarky than what it really is. And in all honesty, same. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dr. Denise Keating Show. It has been a minute since I have done one of my own podcasts by myself. So we have changed the look and the feel of the podcast. Why? Because it's important to have all of the best. You're going to start seeing some changes around here with the cameras, the lighting, different angles, just because it helps people stay engaged longer. But today's topic, I wanted to talk about something very specific. I feel like with the talk let me back up a little bit. with the theme that we're going through with the podcast is the kitchen table conversations. I wanted to bring you in to what it was like to have a conversation with me and people that I know, or people that I don't know. But how would I navigate this conversation? Because I think sometimes we get too wrapped up in the screen conversation. We really don't know how someone's saying something, and maybe we think it's more snarky than what it really is. And in all honesty, same. There are times that I read someone's comments or someone's text messages the same way that I feel. So if I'm having a bad day, I read them pretty snarky. If I'm having a great day, I think I read it better and then what in the content and the context of what they actually meant it to be. But what I've noticed, and I wanted to kind of just read through some things that I have been thinking through when it comes to the kitchen table talk conversation. When we're at the kitchen table, normally with someone that we're actually having a conversation with that we want to learn from, we're not yelling or screaming or throwing words at each other. We're actually coming to listen to what they want to say. We're wanting to understand our friend sitting across from us. Now, I understand, and I have been in the situation myself, where with certain people, there's yelling, screaming, cussing, throwing fists, sometimes throwing objects across the room. But regardless, that's not the conversation that we're actually going to have. We're going to have a conversation on this channel as if we're talking to a friend and we're trying to understand where they're coming from. It's the kitchen table conversation. And I'm inviting you to be that fly on the wall, to hear how someone would navigate hard conversation. On this show, we've talked about things like abortion, immigration, foster care, other things like AI, things that people have literally gotten into brawls over. And the reason is because none of us really know how to have a conversation. We take things too personally, and sometimes it is because it's personal. So in this conversation, I actually want to talk about silencing. Silence. Someone being silent. We often look at silence and we say, wow, your silence is deafening. But we don't extend grace. We don't look at the person and say, hey, you're being silent because maybe something's happening in your life. We don't look at them and say that. Usually what we say is that we assume that people know what's happening around them. People have social media. They should just be able to keep up to date on everything and anything that is in their world. But what we don't see is that they're not ignoring what's happening around them. They don't have the mental and emotional capacity to take on what's happening around them. For some of us, there are things happening like anxiety and depression that people don't see. Maybe I don't talk about it so much online. Maybe I don't want to share online because the last time I shared about it, I got attacked. Maybe there's financial issues going on in our family, marital issues, family dying, friends dying. Maybe someone just lost their job. So of course, the first thing in their head is not to go to social media to make sure that the world is not on fire because friends, the world is always on fire, like literally and figuratively, like literally and figuratively. There has been times that my state has been on fire and people have asked me to emotionally show up where I had no capacity to. Something that I have been really, really learning is that people who have been silent doesn't always mean that they have been complacent. That maybe their silence is that they literally cannot process another doggone thing in their life. Like, I'm not even kidding. Let me ask you this. Is someone's silence complacency when they have lost someone to death? They've lost their job. Maybe they're got into a huge fight with somebody. Is it complacency when they're not speaking out on every single thing that's out there on the internet? No, it's not complacency. You guys, I'm going to be the one to say it. It's not. It's not them ignoring it. It's that they don't have the bandwidth to take on what's happening around them and then handle what's happening inside their home. So when we're looking at something, I have to ask you, are we actually sitting across that person? Are we asking, hey, are you okay? And there have been times in my life where the world was on fire, and personally in my world, things were also on fire. And what did not happen was that person sitting across from me didn't say, Denisha, are you okay? They just said, well, you need to speak out about this. You need to talk about this. You need to fight for this. You need to be angry with me. And in the back of the room by myself, I'm crying alone because that person was more in tune with what was happening in the world while I was silently suffering and being told to stay silent because they said my pain, my hurt, my loss that I had experienced at that moment wasn't a big deal. They literally said that. So when we look at someone, we have to remember we cannot forget that there is somebody sitting across from us that has a lot of life. And we need to understand that some people that we're sitting across from at that kitchen table is having life happen to them. We need to know that sometimes trauma and PTSD, grows. Sorry, my dyslexia. But trauma and PTSD can actually grow in times of stress and panic for somebody. So if someone has already experienced some sort of trauma in their life, maybe they do have anxiety, maybe they do have depression, maybe they have PTSD. So when everything around them is chaotic, those things in their body go, ooh, this is not good. And so they retreat. But what we do is we say, well, you're damned if you speak out, and you're damned if you don't speak out. If you don't speak out, you are a horrible person. If you do speak out and you say something that I didn't like that you said, you're damned too. So we become damned if you do, damned if you don't. Like this is literally what we put a person in and say, speak up. And then they do speak up and you say, well, that wasn't good enough. And it was like, well, what's the point of you yelling and screaming at me? I can't please you. And there was this old saying that I learned a long time ago that said, you can't please everybody. And it's not a very special saying, you guys. It's just a reality is that we cannot please everybody. It's true. We can't. We will never. It won't happen. And I think what happens is that something I learned last year is that we cannot sit with someone and condemn them for doing what we asked them to do and then condemn them for not doing it the way that we wanted them to. They are their own human being. They will say things that are stupid. They will say things that we don't agree with. They will say things that are not as elaborate in the way that we wanted them to say it. They will get it wrong. We will all get it wrong. I will get it wrong, guys. But are we going to allow for people to grow? Are we going to allow for people to grow? Or are we going to say, oh, you made a mistake once, you're incompetent, you're this, you're that, you're not educated enough? Or are we going to sit back and say, you know what, people need opportunities to grow. But what we do is we confine everybody to a box and say, you didn't get it right and you are dumb. Like we do that daily. And if you don't think that you do, take a look at the internet, take a look at everything else. Whenever somebody tries to shift their views a little bit, maybe they woke up from something. Maybe they've looked into information that you have no knowledge about. And just because you disagree with somebody doesn't mean that you get to attack them. So when we look at someone's silence and we condemn them, and then we say, well, you spoke up and we condemn them, what we're not allowing for is we're not allowing for people to learn. We're not allowing for someone to sit down and process. What we have done and what we have seen in especially the last 10 years is people saying, you don't get to speak. You don't have a voice. You need to zip your lip, sit down and shut up and take it. And I'm going to yell and scream and be mean to you. We have seen this. That's abusive behavior, you guys. That is something that should not happen. We should not say, I want you to speak up and then slap you across the face. And I'm going to get a little bit personal here. Okay, so growing up, that was literally how my parents acted. They would set me up for a particular situation, then force me to speak, and then physically slap me across the face. It actually dislocated my jaw because of it. There have been so many times in my abusive friendships or relationships that have come and gone through my parents as well, where I was set up for failure in this conversation, where I was told, you don't get to have this thought. You don't get to have this feeling. You don't get to cry. Then they would proceed to make me cry or make me angry, in the sense of literally like insulting me, telling me I was no good, that I was pathetic, that I was a really horrible things. They would get the reaction out of me, and then they would physically assault me and say, you don't get to have that emotion. That is maybe not the extent that a lot of people are having it in, but when you set someone up and say, okay, I want you to speak, and then they speak and it wasn't exactly what we wanted them to say, then we slap them, then what we're doing is we're creating a world that cannot think for themselves, that we cannot have a difference of opinion, that we go, everything is on fire all of the time, every day. So then what we do, and this is what we have seen, is that people then become, one, disassociated, meaning they disconnect. They're like, forget it. I'm screwed if I do, and I'm screwed if I don't. And so they just don't even deal with it. They become emotionally numb to everything around them. And then they lack the ability to have a conversation. In reality, it would be very bad. And we have seen this from a few people where they have tweeted or they have messaged or Facebook posted or Instagram posted every thought and feeling that they have ever had without processing it. Now, I'm not talking about people who are extreme where they're trying to get a reaction. I'm not even going to say his name. We already know who that is. You don't go and post hate speech to get attention. Let's just throw that out there. One thing. But when we have seen other people do it, it's the conversation of someone who's on, let's say Facebook, and they're like, oh, I've had a horrible day. And you say, hey, what's wrong? And on their public post, and they go, I don't want to talk about it, but you can message me. And then they go through this whole thing, and you're like, okay. Like, did you not want to talk about it? Or did you really want to talk about it, but you just needed attention? And so you posted it to 300 people hoping that somebody would respond. That's really what it is. But then there are people who it's as if they're texting someone privately, posting every thought and emotion without processing, which means when they're angry, their angry processed posts or unprocessed posts are posted. They're happy ones. Those are always great. But when it comes to the angry, the sad, and the depressed, whereas when someone's not being actually able to process what they're feeling and thinking, it looks a little unhinged. It looks a little messy. It looks a lot broken, and it looks really desperate. If I were to do that and not think through what I'm going to post, what I'm going to say, and I use everything as an opportunity for a social media post, I'm going to say some pretty stupid things. You know, it is interesting that social media has become people's diaries. And sometimes that's not bad. Sometimes it helps us know that there are people out there just like us feeling the way that we're feeling. But there's a time and a place. Why are we sharing what we're sharing? Are we sharing it to someone and saying, hey, like, I relate to this. I want to share with other people because maybe somebody else is feeling this exact same thing? Or are we doing it for attention? Or are we doing it to say, like, look, I don't care what people think or feel about me. I'm just gonna. Those are usually the people who have like 2 friends on social media. For me, when I'm going through those moments, if I'm not going to process what I'm thinking and feeling, which is why I stay silent, is because first off, I need to learn. I'm a processor, which basically means I'm not just saying that to say that, but I am a processor, which means I get overwhelmed with a ton of information. So I spend a lot of time looking, a lot of time investigating, a lot of time reading multiple versions from different people because I'm wanting to make sure I'm not missing something. And that does stem from my childhood. That does stem that if I got it wrong, I got slapped across the face. Now, when I'm looking at handling a conflict, it's very hard for me to handle conflicts. And I know a lot of people who feel the same way. A lot of people experience that same thing. Conflicts are hard. But when you are pressured to make a rash decision and a rash conversation, a rash statement, that doesn't feel great. Because in my head, when there is a conflict standing in front of me, I stay silent. One, because I know my words can hurt and I know how to hit below the belt if I really wanted to. But two, I want to make sure that what I say doesn't hurt somebody else or myself or make a relationship more strained than it needs to be. I want to be careful and more calculated in how I say things. But here's the problem is that I've done that for so long because it's easier to just process it by myself that I don't bring people into that whole conversation in my head. So sometimes when I lose my cool, I just have to I do it wrong. And we need to be able to say, wow, friend, that was not great. And not be like, wow, you're a horrible person. You shouldn't be living today, which is what we see happening across the globe in every social media platform, is that if you don't agree with everybody, you should be dead. That is what we have been told. But if we allow people to process what they're thinking, what they're feeling, what they're going through, not just with what's happening in the world, but what's happening in their own corner of the world, we might be able to understand people a little bit better. Now, again, there are people out there who are just rude in how they approach things. They're wanting to have that knee-jerk reaction. Those are not the people that I want to talk to and sit down with, because it's hard to have a conversation with them because they're just, even in the most, we could agree on everything and they're still trying to attack me. Those are people I just don't want to talk to because it's a waste of time and energy because they are just looking for a fight. But then there are other people out there who it's like they are going through a hard time and they're just surviving today. They're just sitting there going, you know what? I don't know what to do. I don't know how to do this. I don't know what to say, but I'm struggling everywhere. And I'm going to be very, 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 very honest with you. There are so many times in the last couple of weeks, months, really, years, really, that I have jumped on social media and jumped right back off because I'm like, I don't even want to take in people's thoughts and feelings and emotions because it's all over the place. But what I have learned in the last year is that there really is this thing that we need to do. We need to get back to listening to understand, not listening to respond. All of us are listening to just have our quick thing. We're not even listening to what the person is saying. So we're just like, oh, I already know what I want to say. Hurry up, stop talking. I want to talk. That is how most of us are functioning in conversations. But what if we looked at someone and said, you know what? I actually want to understand what you think and why you think it. Let's have a conversation. Okay, you said you saw this. Can you show me what you're talking about? That's not gaslighting. I want to know where you found that just because I want to see it too. That's it. I want to see it too. But what we have done is we have used these trigger words: gaslight, trauma, abusive. What was some of the other ones? Oh my God, you guys already know. Like, oh, this person's aggressive. This person is manipulative. This person is this and this and this and this and that. But all they've said is like, hey, I don't appreciate the way you talk to me like that. Like, I'd like to have a conversation with you. Oh my God, you're trying to tell me I don't know what I'm talking about. And it's like, hey, no, legitimately, I'm not trying to be snarky. I'm actually asking a question. Like, you said this. I wanted to try to understand. You said this. Okay, I think what you mean is this. And I have a hard time when in conflict. I have a hard time wanting to listen to the other person sometimes, especially depending on how their body language is, what they're saying to me. If they're speaking down to me, I'm like, I have no capacity for this. I will not subject myself to that. And I've had to learn to press through those things because it can get really, really hard to actually have a conversation if I'm not willing to push through and say, you know what, let me listen. Even if there's conflict, even if I'm feeling this thing where my anger is going up and then I'm hearing them and I'm like, okay, let's bring it back down. Okay, now I'm getting angry again. Okay, let me go back down and hear you, because I need to be able to listen to actually understand what you're saying, because if I can understand what you're saying, I'm probably going to walk away from the conversation different in my understanding of who you are as a person. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it's a bad thing. But different, and saying, okay, this person is saying this. They did not say that. But what we do is we listen between the lines. We read between the lines that don't exist, and we add to what they're saying. And we're like, well, you said this. It's like, well, no, I verbatim did not say that. I said this. Well, you meant this. It's like, no, I meant this. I didn't mean that. And you need to, at that point, we need to take that person at their word. Is when someone says, no, I did not mean that, we have to take them at their word and then watch their actions. Like, boom. You cannot look at someone and say, well, you have the same belief as somebody else, you have the same behavior as somebody else, and you are the exact same as that person. And then when we actually look at the situation, we realize that they didn't even ever say what we thought they said. They didn't act like what we thought that they acted like. And again, I'm not talking about abusive people, you guys. I'm just talking about everyday average people what we get into conflict with. There are abusive people out there. We know that behavior, but we cannot take that behavior of somebody who's abusive and put it on somebody who's not. And that is what we have done. We have stopped listening to understand, and we have listened to only respond. We've listened to find the fight. We've listened to find the argument. We have listened to only push what we want to be heard. And I'm going to be honest, I've done it many, 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 many times. And guess what? Here's the other thing. I don't even think most of us are listening to respond. I think most of us are just wanting to be heard. I think most of us who have grown up not being listened to, not being understood, being falsely accused of things or falsely understood and like told that we were like this when we weren't, we finally have a voice and the strength to say something that when we get into a conversation, it does become the person who's like, shut up, shut up, shut up, shut up. I'm talking. And you're just like, nobody was talking, but they keep thinking like they're so angry that they're like, I just need to get everything out. I grew up in a big family. Okay. I mean, I'm one of 11 kids. Okay. And there is no pausing to talk. We just all do this all day long. And that is very hard to get out of. It has taken me a long time to be actually able to have a two-way conversation. I'm sorry to my husband. He has to remind me of this sometimes. And he's like, hey, I need you to let me speak because you're going on for like a week worth of stuff when we're talking about one day of stuff. And that has been because growing up with 11 kids and 2 adults and then any other adult who wanted to speak and try to give us advice, there was so many voices that we had to, if you didn't get your voice in, you didn't get to speak. And I do think that there was a lot of us who are running with that. We're running with that in conversation. We're running with that in relationships, that when someone has the opportunity to be in a conflict, we don't handle it well because of the fact that we are used to not being heard. And some of us have been in abusive relationships. Some of them have been in not so great friendships. Some of us have been not in great work environments that finally when we get to speak, it's almost word vomit. And so we can't have a conflict and listen to understand or listen to even respond. All we're doing is we're just like, no, I need to be heard. I need to be heard. I need my voice. 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 And I'm going to tell you that's only going to get you so far. Because you can't come to a conversation with a bat in a china shop and expect the china to survive. We're going to make some damage. So we have to get to the point of finding people who let us have a two-way conversation. Not a one-way, a two-way. And if you are in friendships or relationships where it's always the other person talking and you're never getting to speak, it might be time to leave that relationship or that friendship. Because I want to be able to listen to understand. I want to be able to ask questions and it not become offensive. Because there's a lot of things that I don't know, you guys. There's a lot of things you don't know. And there's a lot of assuming happening. A lot of us assume ill intent on the other person. And my husband says, there's a saying that he uses that says, don't assume malice for something that someone legitimately just doesn't know. He says it differently, but basically like, I always assume the worst case scenario. So I believe the worst in people. I'm like, oh, nope, they always have to be. And it's not, it's just that they don't know. It's more of like an ignorance on their side, or it's more of they're just not knowing, and not ignorance in the sense of like they're forcibly making themselves ignorant, but like oblivious. They're just oblivious to how their behavior and their actions come off. So at what point do we stop talking? And when do we start listening? When do we start asking questions to understand the person that's sitting across at our kitchen table? At what point do we hear what they actually say instead of adding to their verbiage? Are we always talking, or are we always listening? How do we have both? Because we need to be able to talk and listen, not just listen or talk. And I'm going to tell you, when you start to listen to people to understand, you will often see why they feel the way that they do. And sometimes it's misplaced anger. Again, maybe it's somebody who is just never is getting the opportunity to speak. Maybe people speak for them all the time or speak above them. And then they like, have you ever been in a conversation where you say something and people are like, oh yeah, whatever, da, 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 and then someone says the exact same thing as you and everyone's like, oh my God, that was so great. Like, I've been there. I would like, I've literally got to the point where I was like, yeah, I said the same thing, guys. And they're, no, you didn't. Not that way. I said, I verbatim said the same thing. I cannot control what people will assume about me, make up about me, feel about me. But what I can do is I can control listening and asking questions to understand, not, and here's the deal, like what I would ask is that if we ever had the chance to sit across the kitchen table or have a phone call together, I would want you to leave going, wow, she actually cared about hearing me. That's what I would hope. But when I come to the table to bash, to bring my bat to the china shop and just smack everything down and walk away triumphant. I don't know why I did it that way. Sorry. If I'm only looking to win in conversations, I'm actually going to always lose, because I'm never going to have a friend, and I'm going to have a very lonely life. I'm going to walk from every conversation being like, yeah, I did it. But then I'm never going to actually be challenged in my beliefs or my thoughts to understand, do I actually know what I'm talking about? But also at the same time, like, if I believe that everybody's a liar and everybody's uneducated and everybody just doesn't know and I'm the smartest person in the room, I'm never going to have a good relationship with anybody. If I can come into the conversation and say like, hey, there is someone who is broken sitting in front of me, or there is somebody who has had life happen sitting in front of me, and they believe the things that they believe because of the way that they've grown up, or the way that they maybe in the environments that they were in, or what they've learned in school or whatever. I want to know their expertise. I look at them very differently. But when I look at people that they're dumb or stupid or they don't know, I'm going to treat them like dirt. So I want to challenge you. Look, like, we cannot control how people respond to us, but we can control how we choose to listen. And so I want you to ask yourself, am I speaking to be heard, or am I asking questions to understand? Do I feel like when I do speak, I don't get opportunities to speak? Like, let's start there, and then move into some conversations that are a little bit deeper of like, what do we do when we're around people who never let us speak? How do we change our environment to make sure that we are around people that we get to learn, that we can make mistakes? Like, guys, we're allowed to make mistakes. We're allowed to get it wrong. But the problem is we have treated every conversation, every word, everything as life or death. And there are some things that are life and death situations. Most of what we are believing is life or death is not life or death. It's not. It's just not. And I think that if we're able to come to the conversation to say, you know what, I see you as a human who has lived experience in something, and I want to get to know what that is and why you believe what you believe, not to challenge you, but to understand, you are going to leave with more compassion for that person sitting across the kitchen table than you are if you come in to try to win. So I want to challenge you. Join me in that kitchen table conversation. Join me in that movement to say, you know what, maybe I don't know what this person is thinking and feeling, and I don't know what this person has lived. Let me ask questions to understand. See how your conversations change. See how your conversations move from I'm winning to I'm understanding, and walking away from a conversation enlightened by somebody else. Anyway, go out and have a kitchen table conversation.